The day everything changed. On the morning of Sophie's 10th birthday, I came home to silence. Not the peaceful kind of silence that settles over a house when everyone is still asleep and the world hasn't demanded anything from you yet. This was a different kind of silence, hollow, wrong, and charged with something I couldn't immediately name. It was the silence of absence, of people who should have been there but weren't, of a life that had quietly emptied itself out while I was looking the other way. I had worked that morning, as I often did, carrying the weight of a schedule that never quite matched everyone else's. I expected the usual chaos of a birthday, the frantic search for candles, the mysterious fingerprints on the frosting, the suitcase blocking the hallway that someone had promised to move 3 times already. I expected my husband Ethan to be wandering around asking where his sunglasses were, as though I had personally agreed to manage the coordinates of everything he owned. I expected his mother Linda to be rearranging something in the kitchen and calling it helping. I expected noise, mess, the beautiful disorder of a family getting ready to celebrate a child. Instead, I walked into nothing. The coat hooks were bare. The counter was empty. The spot where shoes always piled up in their little disrespectful mountain was completely clear. I stood in my own hallway longer than I want to admit, waiting for the house to catch up with itself, waiting for sound to load in like a buffering screen. It didn't. I moved through the rooms slowly, the way you move when your body already suspects something your mind isn't ready to accept. I called out hello, and my own voice startled me, too loud, too alone, bouncing off walls that had no one to absorb it. I checked the coat hooks again as if coats might have reappeared out of guilt. They hadn't. I scanned the living room. No Gary. No Linda. No Ethan. No Ashley. No signs of bags. No signs of life. No signs of the birthday morning I had been quietly dreading and quietly looking forward to in equal measure. And then Sophie walked out. She stood in the hallway in her pajamas, hair still rumpled from sleep, and her face was wrong. Not wrong in a dramatic, falling-apart way. Wrong in the quiet, controlled way that is somehow so much harder to look at, the face a child makes when she is working very hard to hold herself together, and you can see every muscle of that effort. Her eyes were shiny. Her mouth was pressed tight. Her hands were gripping her phone so hard her knuckles had gone pale, as though it were the only solid thing left in the room. She was 10 years old, and she was trying so desperately not to cry that she looked like she was bracing for a storm. I said her name carefully, the way you say someone's name when you already know the answer to the question you're about to ask. I asked where everyone was, and I watched her throat bob as she swallowed hard and blinked, trying to push the tears back somewhere they couldn't escape from. They left, she said. 2 small, flat words that my body received before my mind did. My chest tightened before I'd even processed the meaning. I asked her what she meant, asked her to explain it, and she told me in that shaking, careful voice that she had woken up to an empty house, had not known where anyone was, had not known what was happening, had not known if something terrible had occurred. She had picked up her phone, and that was when she'd found out. She held the phone out to me, and there it was. A photograph too bright and too cheerful to be accidental, the kind of photo people take when they want the world to know how much joy they are experiencing. Ethan stood in the center, grinning, the Florida sun sitting on his face like a reward. Beside him were Linda and Gary, beaming with the satisfaction of people who believe themselves to be the architects of a perfect moment. Ashley, Ethan's sister, was squeezed in next to them. And lined up in front were the children, Kayla, Ethan's 14-year-old daughter from his first marriage, and Ashley's 2 kids, Zoe and Carter, all of them arranged like a living advertisement for family togetherness. Blue ocean behind them, wind in their hair, and across the image, bold and unapologetic, a caption that read, "Family is everything." I stood there holding my daughter's phone and felt 2 realities trying to exist at the same time inside me. Sophie, 10 years old on her birthday, trying not to cry in her pajamas in an empty house. And my husband, my in-laws, my sister-in-law, all of them at the beach, smiling and posting captions about family like the word meant something that had nothing to do with the child standing beside me. I felt something go very still inside me, not the peaceful kind of stillness. The kind that comes just before something breaks. I grabbed my phone and started calling. Ethan first, straight to voicemail, which meant he had either forgotten the phone existed or was actively choosing not to hear it ring. Linda next, no answer, which surprised no one, least of all me. Gary, no answer. Ashley ringing, until finally she picked up in that bright, performative voice people use when they're pretending not to know exactly what they've done. I asked her where they were. There was a pause so brief it almost wasn't there, just long enough for her to remember which version of the story she was telling. "Oh," she said. "Hey." I was not in the mood for hey. I asked again. I asked why the house was empty, why Sophie was standing there crying, why there was a beach photo on social media with every member of our extended family in it. Another pause, and then I heard it, background voices, a shuffle, the quick, sharp sound of someone asking, "Is that her?" And I understood with a cold and clarifying certainty that this was not a private call. I was on speaker. I was entertainment. And then Ashley said, almost brightly, as though she were explaining a minor schedule change, "We decided to just go. We didn't want to lose time." And then Linda's voice came through, louder and sharper and more confident than it had any right to be. Sophie was misbehaving. I looked at my daughter standing beside me. I looked at her red eyes and her clenched hands and her shaking lip. And then I said, very carefully, how exactly Sophie had been misbehaving given that she had been asleep. There was a beat of silence, the kind that happens when someone's story doesn't survive contact with logic. Then Gary's voice. "She's difficult." Ashley's, quick and dismissive. "It's always drama with you too, Sarah." And then finally Ethan, arriving late to his own scene, sounding tired and annoyed the way someone sounds when they're asking you to stop making them feel guilty for something they know they should feel guilty for. "Sarah, don't do this." "Don't do what?" I asked. "Don't ask why you left our daughter on her birthday." "Here we go," Linda snapped. This is exactly what we didn't want. I was aware of Sophie making a small sound beside me, and without thinking, I shifted my body slightly, putting myself between her and my face, the way you do when you're trying to shield someone from something they shouldn't have to see. I asked Ethan directly, "Your solution when you decided the trip couldn't wait was to leave without us. To leave without your daughter, on her birthday." Ashley's response came wrapped in syrup. She said I could still come if I wanted to. She said it like it was a generous offer, like they were doing me a favor by allowing me to join the party I had been excluded from. Linda piled on warmly, saying they hadn't wanted to wake Sophie, that we could come whenever we were ready. And Ethan's voice returned, cooler now, more certain. "We didn't want to lose the day because you were still working. We can't sit around waiting. You can join when you're done." I looked at the photograph on Sophie's phone one more time. I looked at the caption. "Family is everything, except when it isn't, except when it's inconvenient, except when the child you left behind is standing in a hallway in her pajamas trying not to fall apart." I didn't shout. I didn't beg. I didn't give them the version of this argument they could later call dramatic. I just went quiet, and in that quiet something inside me locked into place with the kind of finality you feel in your bones. I ended the call without saying goodbye. Sophie flinched at the sudden silence. I looked at her, 10 years old, birthday morning, holding herself together by sheer force of will, and I made myself a promise that I would spend the rest of that day making sure she didn't spend one more minute of it crying. I told her to go put her shoes on. I told her to pick what she wanted for breakfast. Anything she wanted. And when she looked up at me with those careful eyes and started to ask if we were still going to have a birthday, I didn't let her finish the question. "Yes," I said, "we are going to have a birthday." I did not allow myself to fall apart, because falling apart was something I could do later, privately, when no one needed me. Right now my daughter needed a mother who moved, so I moved. I called my friends, not the ones who said let's plan something sometime, but the ones who, if you call at 10 in the morning and say I need you, show up. I called my parents, and my voice cracked on the first sentence, and that was the only time I let it crack all day. My mother's voice went dangerously quiet, the way a mother's voice gets when she has made a decision and is calmly preparing to execute it. "We're leaving now," she said, and when I pointed out that it was a 2-hour drive, she just repeated it. "We're leaving now." My father said only that they'd be there soon, and there was something in the steadiness of his voice that I needed more than anything else in that moment. I went into the kind of rebellion that has nothing to do with rage and everything to do with love. I pulled out the decorations we had already bought. I ordered a cake with the urgency of someone who has decided that the universe owes her daughter a good birthday, and she is personally going to collect. I dug through every drawer in the house looking for candles. I turned the music up loud enough to fill every corner, loud enough that the morning's silence couldn't creep back in. Sophie hovered at first, unsure, still bruised by everything that had happened before 9 in the morning. So I gave her important jobs. I told her to pick the playlist, because this was her day and the soundtrack was hers to choose. I told her to decide on the frosting color. I told her to choose the snacks. Small decisions, small pieces of power, small reminders that this house was hers, and this day was hers, and no one who had chosen to leave could take either of those things away from her. Friends arrived with bags of chips and balloons, and the beautiful, chaotic energy of people who showed up on purpose. One of them brought flowers, which someone joked was for the funeral of Ethan's common sense. Another produced a ridiculous birthday crown and placed it on Sophie's head with great ceremony and announced that the birthday girl ran this place. Sophie laughed, small and surprised at first, then bigger, like laughter was something she'd forgotten was available to her that morning. When my parents arrived, the house changed. It filled up with people who were there because they wanted to be there, people who looked at Sophie like she was exactly where she was supposed to be, people who had driven 2 hours because a 10-year-old's birthday mattered. My mother held Sophie so tight that Sophie squeaked. My father lifted her off the ground the way he used to when she was small and said happy birthday, kiddo, like it was a promise he intended to keep. We took photographs, real ones, the kind where the smiles reach the eyes because no one is performing anything. We posted one of them not because we needed validation from strangers, but because I wanted a marker in the world, a timestamp that said we were here, we celebrated, we did not disappear. By the time the candles were blown out, Sophie's cheeks were flushed from laughing rather than crying, and she leaned into me on the couch afterward, full of cake and sugar and the particular exhaustion that only comes from a day that has turned itself around completely. "Best birthday," she whispered. I felt my throat tighten, and this time it was not with sadness. When Sophie finally went to bed that night, I sat at the kitchen table with my phone in my hand and the quiet settling around me like something earned. This quiet was different from the morning's quiet. This one felt like control. I stared at the screen for a long moment, and then I called Ms. Reynolds, a divorce lawyer, and I scheduled an appointment for the following week. To understand why that birthday was the moment everything changed, you have to understand what had been building for years. I met Ethan when Kayla was 2, small and soft-curled, with sticky fingers and enormous eyes. He had the newly single father routine down perfectly. The tired eyes, the warm smile, the I'm doing my best energy that made you want to help him do better. He talked about co-parenting with Kayla's mother, Natalie, as though it were something he had designed specifically to demonstrate his character. He got down on Kayla's level. He remembered her favorite color. He packed the right snacks. He was present in the way that matters, and watching him made me fall faster than I might have otherwise. When he introduced me to Linda and Gary, I thought I had been extraordinarily lucky. They fussed over Kayla with the particular devotion of grandparents who have decided that one child is their life's purpose. Does she need her water? Is she cold? Would you like the blue cup, sweetheart? And I watched them and thought, with a clarity that almost hurts to remember now, that if they could love Kayla this much, then our child, the child Ethan and I would someday have, would be loved so thoroughly that nothing in the world could touch her. It seemed like an inheritance, that love. It seemed like something that would expand to include whoever joined the family. It didn't expand. It narrowed. It contracted around Kayla like a spotlight that refused to move no matter how many people stepped into the room. Sophie was born, and I waited for them to open up, to shift, to make room. Instead, the favoritism that had seemed so sweet when it was directed at Kayla began to reveal itself as something else entirely, not an abundance of love but an exclusivity of it. Kayla got the exact present she'd asked for, in the right color with a bow. Sophie got whatever Linda had grabbed at the last second. A keychain from a gas station, a half-melted chocolate bar from the bottom of a coat pocket, a shirt in the wrong size printed with a slogan nobody could explain. When Linda forgot to bring Sophie something, which happened with a regularity that could not possibly have been accidental, she would smile and say, "Oh, shoot," like it was an endearing little habit rather than a recurring choice. Gary would hold up Kayla's drawings like they belonged in a gallery and turn to Sophie's with the slow, disappointed nod of a teacher who has given up on a student. The words came eventually, said with the casualness of people describing the weather. "She's not as bright. She doesn't behave as well. She's dramatic. She's difficult." Sophie heard. Children always hear. I tried to counter it, to build a wall of love around her that was higher than their indifference. But you cannot outlove a room full of adults who have decided to make a child feel small. My own position in the family had never been fully granted either. I had tried to be a safe adult in Kayla's life, not her mother, not trying to replace Natalie, just a trustworthy presence. But Ethan and Linda and Gary had made it clear, without ever quite saying it directly, that I did not belong in any real authority in my own home. If I reminded Kayla it was bedtime, Linda would override me in front of her. "Oh, she can stay up a little longer." If I enforced a basic house rule, Gary would laugh and tell me to relax. If Kayla spoke rudely and I corrected her gently, Ethan would step in and say he'd handle it, as though my voice were a trespasser. And sometimes they'd do it with that particular tone, gentle but deliberate, that taught Kayla, over years of repetition, that her stepmother's words did not require her attention. Technically, they were not wrong about the legal arrangement. Emotionally, they were doing something that had nothing to do with protecting Kayla's relationship with her mother, and everything to do with keeping me in a diminished position, beneath them, grateful for whatever scraps of authority they allowed me to keep in my own house. When Ethan suggested that Linda and Gary move in, I agreed because I did not want to be the person who said no to family helping. Temporary, he called it. The word people use when they want you not to hear permanent. Once they were inside the house stopped feeling like mine. Linda moved through the kitchen with the authority of someone who has decided that ownership is a matter of presence rather than paperwork. She corrected me in my own space, rearranged things I had arranged, and treated every suggestion I made as a request requiring her approval. The great irony, the one that still makes something cold move through me when I think about it, is that the house was in my name. My parents had helped me buy it. The deed, the mortgage, the financial responsibility, mine. Linda did not care whose name was on paper. She cared who she could dominate in practice. So by the time Sophie stood in that hallway on her 10th birthday, holding back tears because the adults in her life had looked at her and decided she was the acceptable loss, it did not feel like a new betrayal. It felt like the one I had been preparing for without knowing it. It felt like every small cruelty they had ever allowed themselves had been building to this precise configuration of events. And now that I could see the whole shape of it clearly, I understood that nothing was going to change unless I changed it. They came back 3 days later, sun-kissed and relaxed, trailing the easy energy of people who had spent a long weekend enjoying themselves and left their problems behind. My parents were already at the house when they arrived. Mr. Lopez, the process server my divorce lawyer had arranged, was there too, quiet, professional, folder in his hands. Ethan walked in first, still wearing the remnants of a smile, looking toward the hallway as though he expected Sophie to come running out and resume normal life. Linda followed behind him, scanning the room with the particular expression of someone looking for something to criticize. Gary came in last, carrying his bag with the posture of a man who has never been asked to leave anywhere. Then they saw my parents. Ethan's smile disappeared. Linda's eyebrows went up. Gary frowned. And then Ethan's eyes moved to Mr. Lopez, and I watched the moment understanding arrived on his face and replaced whatever ease he had carried through the door. "What's this?" he said. Mr. Lopez stepped forward and did his job without ceremony. He handed Ethan the divorce papers. Then he turned and handed Linda and Gary their 30-day notice to vacate the property. Linda took the papers like they might be contagious. Gary grabbed his like he could intimidate the words into rearranging themselves. Linda read quickly, she always has, and her voice rose almost immediately. "What is this?" she demanded. "Who are you?" And then, turning to me with the expression of someone who cannot fathom that a consequence has arrived. "Sarah, what did you do?" Ethan looked up from his papers and did exactly what I had known he would do. He reached for the most comfortable story available to him. "You're being dramatic," he said. I almost smiled because there it was, not what happened, not how do we fix this, not what have we done, just Sarah is dramatic. Sarah is the problem. Sarah is throwing a tantrum. I said, "You abandoned our daughter on her birthday." Linda scoffed. I told her she did not get to scoff her way out of this. Gary stepped forward with his face doing the thing it does when he has decided he is the wronged party. "This is our home too," he said. "It's not," my mother said from behind me, quietly, and that silenced him for a moment in the way that quiet words sometimes silence loud ones. Ethan held the papers up slightly as though they were a counter-argument. "You're really doing this," he said. "Over a trip. Over our daughter crying in her pajamas," I said. "Over you telling me she was misbehaving while she was asleep. Over you posting family is everything while she stood in this house trying not to sob." Linda's eyes flashed. "She's dramatic," she repeated, like repetition could manufacture truth. "Just like you." Ethan said I was embarrassing myself, and something in me felt almost relieved because there it was, the clearest version of what I had always known. No ambiguity. No room left to wonder if I was being unfair. Just the same old language, worn smooth from years of use. I told him to leave. He said that was his house too, and it is true that marital residence is legally complicated, but that particular moment was not a courtroom. It was a living room. It was a boundary. He could argue about legal complexity somewhere else. Linda erupted. Gary shouted something about respect and about everything they had done for us, as though the act of living in a home I owned and paid for had been a sacrifice on their part. Ethan made a production of gathering his things, grabbing his bag with the particular energy of someone who has decided that leaving first is a form of winning. "Fine," he said. He pointed at me. "But don't call me begging when you get over this, because you will." Then he left, and Linda lifted her chin and announced she was not staying here with them, meaning my parents, and Gary muttered about disrespect one final time, and they took enough of their things to make it dramatic and promised to be back for the rest. The door shut behind them. The silence that followed was nothing like the silence of that birthday morning. That silence had been emptiness. This one was different. This one had weight and intention. My father's hand rested briefly on my shoulder. My mother let out a long, quiet breath. Later, when Sophie came home from her friend's house, I had made sure she wasn't there for any of it. She walked into the living room and stopped short and asked where they were. I pulled her into my arms and told her they were gone for now, and that she was safe. For the first time since I had seen that beach photograph, I meant it completely. 6 months on, the house feels like mine in a way I had almost forgotten was possible. Not symbolically, but physically. The particular freedom of putting your keys down and knowing they will be there, of walking through your own kitchen without waiting for a correction to land, of waking up in the morning in a home where the air does not carry anyone else's agenda. The divorce is final. The constant recalibration, the shrinking of myself to fit around other people's comfort, the management of a family structure that was designed to benefit everyone except the people I loved most, all of it is gone. My parents come over more often now. They have the time and they use it. Sophie moves through this house like she belongs to it, like she has finally been given permission to take up space, because she has. She laughs more. She doesn't wait to be compared or evaluated or found lacking. She just exists, loudly and freely and completely, the way a 10-year-old is supposed to. The custody arrangement surprised me. Ethan has visitation and I have full custody, and he did not fight very hard for more. That part still stings in a way I don't have language for, because he fought for 50-50 with Kayla. He showed up for Kayla. He made that matter. With Sophie, it was as though she had always been second, always been adjacent to the family he really wanted, always been the child who came with the woman he had married rather than the child he had chosen. I don't have a clean explanation for that. I probably never will. What I have instead is my daughter's face in the morning, unguarded and unhurried, looking like a child who is not waiting for anything bad to happen. No more captions about family from people who left her behind. No more accusations to justify cruelty. Just a house full of people who show up every time without being asked.